problems with you people. Now, you're going to hear about it.
Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast. Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast. Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast. Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast.
Third Degree, the podcast, is brought to you by Soccer90.com. Soccer90 wants to give all listeners of Third Degree an exclusive Christmas special, so you can get all those last-minute gifts. I mean, listen, it's after Christmas now. Let's call it a post-Christmas gift. So from now until the end of December, the end of the year, all listeners of Third Degree get 30% off when you use the code THIRDXmas. That's 3RD Xmas at checkout. That's 30% off. What a bonus. Soccer90.com. Use the code THIRDXmas. Obviously, it's going to take 3 to 4 days for shipping and processing to take place. Some exclusions do apply. Hello, FC Dallas Curious fan, or if perhaps you're listening during the holiday season, we'll call you an FC Dallas masochist. Welcome to Third Degree, the podcast. This is episode 243. You can probably tell by my voice, I am Buzz Carrick. Peter Welpton and Dan Crooke both are not around today for various work and family reasons. So consider this your Christmas, holiday, Festivus present from me to you, as I will be here to talk all things FC Dallas with you guys. Hopefully you'll find this an entertaining and perhaps thought-provoking podcast on the club that is FC Dallas, the club we all follow and hope to have good things happen in 2024. Perhaps today you might hear a few more pauses and it might be a bit more jittery than usual since I am doing it by myself. So forgive me if it's not quite as smooth and seamless as it might be ordinarily with Peter hosting. I'll do my best to get through a couple of topics here and provide you guys hopefully a positive listening experience. All right, there's been a couple of things in the news. Let's go through a couple of those items and then we'll get to the bulk of the podcast a little bit later. The first piece of news item is that someone out there has drawn up the groups for the 2024 Leagues Cup. They're not complete, of course, but the initial pairings are based off of the finishes in Major League Soccer and in Liga MX in the last two segments, the Apertura and the Clausura for Liga MX. And effectively, what's important to know, and I'll assume the math is correct at this point, I don't have any reason to doubt it, because everyone seemed to agree that it was correct, is that FC Dallas has been paired with Tigres for the Leagues Cup group. Now, there will be a third team that will be selected from the bottom sections of the standings. More than likely, it'll be an MLS team that Dallas will get paired with, and just the one Mexican team. I believe that's the way that works. But the important thing to know is, yes, it will be Tigres. That means, of course, that when Tigres comes and plays here, as they do in the Leagues Cup, you're looking at probably a home crowd for Tigres. In my experience watching Mexican teams play here in the Metroplex, Tigres draws the best here in this town, in this market, of any of the teams from Mexico. So you can expect a really good crowd for them when they come to town. And if you remember, they are a former partner of FC Dallas for a while. There was a partnership agreement between Tigres and FCD in the Michael Hitchcock era of this club. They used to play a little challenge cup called the Rio Grand Plate. So this will, in a way, be a revival of that. There was even a Dallas tribute Tigres jersey at one point that I don't even have any evidence they played in a game in it, but I believe they did, and they sold those kits for consumption, and there are player numbered and worn versions of it out there, so it was used at some point. So that's an old relationship. We'll have to see how that game goes. That's obviously a team that does really well here and will make a great matchup for Dallas, a tough matchup for Dallas in that tournament, and it should be an absolute ball to see that game go forward. I myself have really enjoyed Leagues Cup, much more than I thought I was going to. I think it's a great addition. Shutting down the league for a month is weird, but whatever, that's puts a little pause on the season and gets us really closer to an Apertura and Clausura type presentation, and does actually help MLS line the league up with a little more, with the European calendar, the world calendar in terms of play because of this pause in the summer. That maybe can be useful to the clubs in the league in years forward if they need to stop for in the middle of summer for some reason, like a World Cup. All right, FC Dallas news item number 2 is Dallas was linked to a young player named Santiago Castro, who is a 19-year-old striker who plays for Vélez Sarsfield, which is a Argentine club. The price on him is reportedly about 7 million euros, I think it is. in that ballpark. Dallas was linked to him as well as Bologna, which makes it probably very unlikely that Dallas would have a shot at him compared to Bologna. But still, it's a link that's out there, reported by some people that are quite believable and quite substantial. I cannot offer any substance on this story beyond the fact that the people that reported it are not fly-by-night operations. They're people of legitimate value. Now, could Dallas get this player? In the wake of the Pepe money, Dallas was willing to spend on Alan Velasco, but I don't know if they're willing to drop $7 million on a player without that kind of income coming in. At the same time, I don't know that they can compete with Bologna in terms of being able to offer attractive, high level of play. Yet Dallas is a team that will progress a player through and sell a player on. The bottom line is, this is interesting. This is the kind of player that is a young, exciting attacker like Dallas seems to have gone for lately. Alan Velasco falls into the same category, in my opinion. The kid that they've just signed, the Romanian-Canadian kid, if you will, whose name is Enes Sali, he falls into this category as well, perhaps. Can Dallas swing this kind of transfer fee? Maybe. It's in shouting distance to the kind of money they spend. I'm not super confident right now. But here's what I will say is important. Because the level of people that have reported this is legitimate, I believe it is legitimate. So it does make me question, or not question, it does make me wonder perhaps if Dallas is out there looking for a pure, more 9 kind of player. This guy fits that bill. The kid they drafted out of college, moved up to the 3rd overall pick, drafted, fits this bill. So it makes me wonder about things like Jesus Ferreira. They openly talked about the draft pick being successful. Maybe they could go a 2-striker system. If they were to sign a player like this, would they go to a 2-striker, or would they move this guy in the middle and he is quite young, granted 19 years old, but could he be a 9 in the future? Could he be a 9 now and play Jesus as a wing? It leads me to think that there are options out there with them looking at a 9, that they're not as married to a 4-3-3 as we might think. Now, granted, given this is a young player, but when you pay him $7 million for a player, you're expecting him to play. You don't spend $7 million on a player and then expect him to sit around and not play. This would be an Alan Velasco level of come right in and get right into the games, I would imagine. So it makes me think that they're not married 100% to Jesus Ferreira at the 9. But we'll see. Time will tell. When the window opens, we'll see if they go after this young player, Santiago Castro, or if they go for somebody else at the 9 position. Needless to say, it's getting a little crowded at that spot, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit going forward. But it is intriguing. It is fascinating. This is the kind of signing I would love, a young player that would probably have to be a U22 initiative, at least, if not a DP. I believe, if I've calculated it correctly, they could add a 3rd U22 initiative. Or might this player be a DP? They can make moves that could create space for a DP. If this guy is the guy, or if there's a different guy that's the guy. Remember, 1 out of 10 links actually is real, and even less of them come to fruition. But this one looks like it was pretty legit based on who reported it. All right, news item number 3. 5 teams are reportedly getting 3rd kits in MLS. No, one of them will not be FC Dallas. We've talked about this many times before. There is a threshold, and the particular website that reported this mentioned that they believe, and it's been rumored to be, that threshold is 100,000 kits. That's a lot of kits. The point is that very, very few teams in MLS can swing the number of sales that it requires to get a 3rd kit. FC Dallas is far from that mark. If it really is 100,000, I don't know that there's 100,000 people that call themselves FC Dallas fans, to be honest, let alone sell 100,000 kits. Consider, if you will, that the entire FC Dallas Academy has self-reported from them about 5,000 kids in it. And if each of them gets a kit or 2, that's only 10,000. That's a long way from this 100,000 rumored number. What the exact threshold is, I don't know. It's very, very high. And you've only seen teams in the past like Atlanta pull it off in recent times. Seattle's gotten to recently. So if it's up to 5, that's good news for the league, but don't expect it to be FC Dallas. All right, now we move on to what I want to do for the bulk of this podcast, and that is break down the FC Dallas roster by position, look at the bodies in those positions, and maybe just think about how we feel about any particular spot on the field, how we feel about how that spot holds up, what kind of players might be in those spots. Remember, one of the imperatives that the coaching staff and the technical director here have talked about this year is being better to able to handle what they consider the increased workload of games, with the additions of League Cups and Open Cup and Champions League, if you're in that. FC Dallas isn't, the travel here, the heat here, all those things. They want to better be able to handle those phases. Now, you might think that Dallas with a 30-man roster should be able to handle that load easily, but remember that the bottom 10 players are kids, are supplemental players. They're not developed. They're not full senior players. In theory, they're not necessarily guys you can count on very much. So really, you're talking about Dallas dealing with an 18 to 20-man roster and trying to navigate these waters. Well, Dallas really wants to make their whole 30-man roster be more viable. They want to try and use the supplemental roster with more viable players that can fill greater loads of work in these games and help them better get through games and try and not have the load of injuries that they had last season. That was the big takeaway from season 2 of Nico Estevez's tenure, is we need to be able to deal with this workload, what they see as a higher workload than in past in this league. So we'll go back to front and we'll start up front and we'll talk about each position and we'll go through the depth chart and talk about each player and how they fit into that paradigm of how useful they can be. And we'll start up 9 with, of course, Jesus Ferreira, who is a young DP, has been a young DP. Now he turns 24 right around Christmas Eve, in fact, next year, which puts that birthday after the end of next season. So this should be his last year as a young DP, which is positive because that keeps his cap hit lower than it would be if he was a senior DP, unless MLS changes the rules again, which they do all the time. Obviously, Jesus Ferreira, big-time player. He's going to play a lot. He's going to play the bulk of games, but remember, he could miss games for call-ups, et cetera, and if he gets hurt, then it's a real problem. Behind him, they have Jesus Jimenez, and as I go down this roster of 9s, you'll see why I'm afraid that they might actually hold on to Jesus Jimenez. While he's not been highly impactful, he is a veteran. He does know how to play. You can put him in games and chew up minutes, perhaps, even if they're not fantastic minutes. They might not be mistake-ridden minutes. And you know how this coach here, Coach Esteves, is about not blowing games and being able to fulfill your defensive responsibility. A lot of that just includes being in the right place and playing in the right shape, that he may not have confidence in some of these other names that we're going to go through here behind the top 2 to be able to do that. Now, I think it's a terrible idea to keep him because of the massive salary hit you're going to take and how much you'd have to buy him down. I think they should use the buyout, but let's say for a minute they don't. They'll say they're not going to go after this, Santiago, Castro. Look, clearly they're out there looking at 9s. Whether they're going to pull the trigger or not on Jimenez may depend on whether they get somebody or not. If they get nobody, they might stick with him, as terrifying as that sounds. Because behind Jimenez, we have Jose Mulato. Well, how do we feel about Jose Mulato? He certainly hits a lot of bangers at North Texas Soccer Club. But so far, he's not been able to translate that to MLS. I watch a player struggle to create space and get off a clean opportunity at the MLS level. I'm not convinced that he's a contributor at this level. Behind him, we have the brand new first round pick, Logan Farrington. Dallas traded up about $300K in GAM. That's appropriate actual amount actually to trade up and get him. He's a player they're really excited about. People are talking big things about this player. I hope that they're correct. You guys heard me say, if you listen to last week's podcast, that I would have preferred a center back. I still think that's true. I still would have preferred a center back. But if this guy's legit as they think he is, I will eat crow pie all day, because the way they're talking about him, this guy would immediately become the number 2 striker on the team if he's as good as they say he is. Could they even be so good that you would change formations and play a 2-striker system or move Jesus out wide? I suppose that's possible. But that's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts. Right now, we have no idea. We need to see him against major league soccer competition, against college competition where there's massive amounts of space, loads of time on the ball. He hits absolute bangers. He looks as good as Jose Mulato does at North Texas Soccer Club. You see how that worked out. So until you see them play against MLS competition, you can't count on him. Count on anyone, in fact, until you see him play at that level. So project there, hopefully worth adding. But that's 4 players deep already at 9. Also include there Malik Henry Scott, the homegrown player they just signed out of college. He's Tarek Scott's older brother. For me, Malik is more of a 9 who can play a little wing, and Tarek's more of a wing who can play a little 9. Some people feel it's the other way, whichever one you want. Both of them are home grounds. Both of them are unproven. Both of them are going to play a lot in North Texas. But technically, they're on the FC Dallas roster and will be loaned down. So they are part of this mix. If other guys get sold off or other guys get bought out, and you're talking about having bodies coming in and fill minute loads, you might be looking at these guys. Maybe a little more later in the season than early in the season. But they should be viable candidates to play, particularly Malik, who's older. If he's not going to prove himself real quick at 22, I think he is off the top of my head, he's only got to have a pretty short window to prove himself. You're going to expect to see him, get into the first team squads by mid-season, or you're going to be worried that maybe it's not happening. Or he better be crushing it at North Texas, really. He's going to have a tight window. So at 9, that's 5 bodies, depending on which one you want to count, Malik or Tariq as the 9. How many of those guys can you count on? Well, Jesus and then we'll see. Maybe Farrington can come through like they think, but it's not a surprise Dallas is out there in the 9 market based on these reports we're seeing of who they might be interested in or were interested in perhaps before they got. That'll tell you something. Wow, what would that tell us about Logan Farrington if they quit going into the 9 market because they think that highly of this kid? Wow, that would be something. By the end of training camp, we'll know a lot more about what they think about this kid based on that. All right, let's move on to the wing. I'm not going to differentiate between left and right wing because Dallas in particular likes to flip wings all the time. They like to do it both internally to a single game, but also from game to game. There's a desire quite often for switch foot wings, which is a strong foot on the opposite side so you can cut inside and shoot, but also they play guys with a more traditional sort of setup. Paul Arriola, being right-footed, mostly plays on the right, but he's expressed a desire to play on the left some so he can cut inside and shoot like Alan Velasco does on the other side. We saw Bernard Camugo, who's a lefty, come up through the academy mostly playing on the right, but he's mostly a lefty, so you might see him more on the right wing coming in and shooting on his left foot with the first team. We'll see. So as of today, we're going to pencil in the 2 starters as Bernard Camugo and Paul Arriola. Those are the 2 choices that seems quite obvious for now. We'll come to Alan Velasco in a minute. Those seem likely to be the guys. There's a rumor, of course, that Paul Arriola might be of interest to some League MX teams. He is a DP. He's the DP most likely to be bought down because he's a senior DP if you wanted to clear a DP spot. Behind Arriola and Camugo, probably you're looking at Eugene Ansa. Now, again, I probably should have included Eugene Ansa in the 9 conversation because while we saw him play more wing than 9, he is capable of playing as a 9. And we did see him there more towards the end of the season. He might make more sense as your second 9 than Jesus Jimenez might right now. Certainly than Mulatto might. But either way, for now, since he's played more wing than 9, we'll keep him in the wing conversation. Then you have Dante Seeley, who since coming back from PSV played quite a bit more minutes than we expected, even translating to wingback sometimes, which I hated, but it was the thing that happened. You have Enes Sali, the new Canadian-Romanian 18-year-old signing that's a U22 initiative. That's a player that they're going to want to invest playing time in because the idea is to buy young and sell high. He has a multiple-year contract, so it's not a rush on him. And Coach did say, don't expect him to walk in day one and be in there constantly, but you have to look at him as a guy they're going to want to invest time in a way that puts him in the same category as Dante Seeley. So there's a little bit, and Tarek Scott, who we should also mention in this category. So you've got 3 young players, and Bernard Camugo, for that matter, is young also, that all need minutes and development. So there's a little bit of a logjam in terms of that development there. Some of those guys, probably Tarek Scott, will play a lot at North Texas Soccer Club coming off his MCL, ACL double injury. But if you look at wing as a collective whole, we think Camugo's ready to start. Arriola, of course, and Eugene Ansa probably a starter category, capable and starter category. And then we're looking at Enes Sali, Dante Seeley, and Tarek Scott as developmental projects. That's a lot of question marks there. That's not too deep at proven. That's, 1 each proven and then 1 guy we think is ready and a lot of development, a lot of possibility. So not so far through the 9 and through the wings, we're a little shaky, perhaps. We're not really sure. There's a lot of question marks at a lot of these positions, which is not necessarily making us feel super great. Even Arriola, we really want to see a bounce back season from him. If he plays again like he did in 2023, that's going to be a real problem. Let's move on to the central midfield, and we're kind of going to lump all these together because of the way that they move these players a lot. I'm putting Alan Velasco firmly in this section of the roster. We saw in the latter half of the year he was used almost exclusively as that attacking mid free 8, call it a 10 if you will, depending on the shape, single pivot or double pivot. He's fully entrenched in that position. He is also out for most of, in my mind, the year. They have not indicated they want to do a season-ending IR on him, but they will do, I assume, what they call these short-term, if you will, injury reserve type moves, which are a minimum of 6 games out. When you use one of these short-term injury reserves, you can get roster relief, but not cap relief. So this allows them perhaps to keep a homegrown up with the first team rather than down with the second team with North Texas. So basically, Alan Velasco, I think his roster spot will be filled by some of these homegrowns they just signed. But in that same sort of grouping with him of your 8s, your linking 8s, your attacking 8s, your free 8s, however you want to describe them, other than Alan Velasco, we have Sebastian Lletget. He did not have as good a 2023 as he did 2022. Obviously, everyone's aware of the off-field problems and the injuries he had. Hopefully he rebounds. Also in this discussion is Paxton Pomykal. And I think between those 3 guys, you're looking at where your starters are going to come from any given game. And with Velasco out a great deal, that's a lot of weight on Lletget and Pomykal for a great deal of the time. Now, you might wonder where Asier Iaramendi is in this conversation, the great new Spanish player we have. Based on what we're looking at in terms of roster moves with Facundo Quignon departing and the way Iaramendi played a lot of 6 down the stretch, it looks like going into the season, Iaramendi is your primary 6. Now, you might play a fair bit of double pivot, in which case you might see him and Paxton kind of swapping in and out of those roles. But for the most part, we're penciling in Iaramendi as your number 1 holding mid, with Liam Fraser, the Canadian homegrown, which makes him a domestic player, as a holding mid also. And that leaves us a bunch of unproven young 8s behind all that. So holding mid seems fine. You can include in this conversation Nolan Norris. He's played more midfield than center back of late with North Texas. He played left back with the national team when he was with them, but we think he's a 6 maybe or an 8 maybe. He factors in here. You have Seeking Sabling, who at one point looked like he was relatively promising, but then fell off of big time in terms of playing time. Can he regain the coach's affection? You have Alejandro Urzura, who was, we think, a hybrid contract, who went with North Texas last year and then has progressed to an FC Dallas homegrown deal. I assume he'll play the bulk of this season again at North Texas. You want to see him dominate at that level. We haven't seen that yet. And then Thomas Pondeka, who was the latest North Texas, straight from North Texas signing, who was originally a open trialist. He had a really great back end of the year. As a wing, he didn't look so great. But the last third of the season he played as an 8, he looked terrific. Sort of a free attacking kind of 8. So he's in that mix. But again, younger guy, unproven guy at the MLS level, raw. We don't know what we're going to get there. So kind of a light conversation in there. Allen's out for a long time. So you're really looking at Lletget and Pomykal and maybe Siki as guys you can rely on. Maybe you mix in Iaramendi as an 8 and start Fraser if you need to, rather than having Iaramendi as a 6 and Fraser as the backup. And then project players in Pondeka, Urzura, Nolan Norris. So again, when we talk about this desire to have the roster filled with more guys that can help you get through the weight of this schedule, I'm not sure I'm seeing a lot of that yet. So there's a heavy top load here, but then a light bottom load. And there may be some activity at this position among this triple position here, whether it be some kind of 6 that you can make Iaramendi more of an 8. You never forget this year that the ability to take homegrowns and send them down to North Texas gives you a lot more roster freedom than you might have before. I think there might be a desire to bring in 1 or 2 young in their career, but maybe more established than some of these homegrowns are. We'll see. In the years past, I would have said this mold fit perfectly with what FC Dallas always has done, but this coach doesn't seem to want those 17, 18-year-old kids quite as much unless they're Alan Velasco. All right, let's move on to the back line. Left back, this was pretty entrenched. Marco Farfan, Sam Junka. Man, either one of those guys can start. Coach seems to like Marco Farfan better, but Sam Junka is terrific. What a great addition he was. He can play all over the field. Awesome. Also, at left back, you have Isaiah Parker, who so far has not been able to break in. Generation Adidas player, so roster protection, no cap hit. Did not do well at San Antonio like we kind of expected. There was an injury there, and that kind of cost him a bit, and they struggled to get back into the lineup. I still think there's a tight mismatch problem here, but there's just not going to be really a lot of room for him on this roster. This is going to be tough. I mean, maybe there's an expectation that he has to be on the roster, but I don't know. We're starting to get way over 30 players here, and there just may not be room. So stand by on Parker. Something's got to give here somewhere on this roster. Let's go to right back. We'll skip over center back for now and go to right back. This one also is pretty entrenched. Giovanni Jesus is also out for a good chunk of the season. Again, probably half the season, so he'll be in before Alan Velasco. So again, you can have some roster relief on him out of the gate, but not cap relief. Obviously, opening day, Ima Tuamasi is your starter. They kept Herbert Indele. I was a bit surprised by that, but he's your converting from wing out of Indiana to right back. He's played a little bit more of it for North Texas than he has for FC Dallas. We have seen a little bit there of FC Dallas, but he also still plays a fair amount of wing for North Texas. I'm really not sure how he fits in grand scheme. We're going to have to wait and see on him, but for now, he's this backup right back. There might be some interesting questions that have to be asked when Giovanni Jesus is activated at some point, perhaps near midseason. And then you might have to make some room here. We'll see how that goes. Maybe there's a midseason loan for Indele in the cards. We'll see. Again, this is a position that actually looks like you want to look. 2 first-team starter guys at the top, project at the bottom. That's how you want to look. The question is just how you massage the roster to keep the project around while you have these 2 guys that are potential starters going at it. One of whom will be out for a good chunk, of course. All right, let's move to center back. This one's tough. This is a problem, in fact. We've already talked about Nolan Norris, who we think is more of a midfielder than a center back at this point. So let's not talk about him in this position, other than a passing comment. Right now, there's 2 starters here on this team at this position, Nkosi Tafare and Sebastian Ibiaga. You might think that sounds great, but I've always felt that you want to carry 5 center backs total, and 3 of them be starter capable, maybe even a 4th that you could have a fringe starter like Ahmet Corsa was last year. So outside of Nkosi Tafare, great. Sebastian Ibiaga, terrific season. You had Jose Martinez last year, who struggled with physical problems, struggled with the heat, and they've moved on from him. They have not replaced that body. There should be, in our way of thinking, and clearly the coach's way of thinking too, most of last year, there should be 3 starter-capable players here, and you should have a rotation among those 3. So we're expecting there to be a signing here. Stay tuned on that. And after that, you have projects. Again, Norris, we've mentioned, we think is more of a midfielder now, but you have the 2 draft picks that Dallas made in the 2nd and 3rd round. Turner Humphrey is a kid out of Oregon that maybe is a nice project. You know, with Ahmet Corsa being moved on from, although they did say they were still talking to him. Maybe that's a fallback emergency if camp opens up. But Turner Humphrey has a shot to make this senior roster here, the first team roster, just based on the math and the potential things that Dallas said about him when he was picked. I'm not sure I love that. I think a player that's taken the 2nd or 3rd round really needs to be playing at North Texas for a year. But we'll see, because if you don't have him, and we think Norris is more of a midfielder, not only do you need to sign a frontline starter like Martinez was, you then need to sign a project starter like Corsa was. So maybe they'll see what they have in camp in these draft pick Turner Humphrey and then decide if they need Corsa or not. And they also have another draft pick they made at Mads Westergren out of SMU. On paper, a better resume than Humphrey, the other draft pick, but Humphrey they picked more on potential and upside, I think, than Westergren. Plus, Westergren's got a international slot requirement. That's going to be really tough for him. If he decides to stay here at FC Dallas, he'll have to play the year at North Texas, I think. I don't think there's any way in heck you get that guy on the first-team roster. But a project worth discussing, I think, if he were to stick around. The question is, like, is Humphrey good enough, to make the senior roster and as your fourth guy, or is he the fifth guy because Nolan's not a center back anymore? If he's the fifth guy, you need two. So there's some work to be done at center back for sure here. A starter and maybe a project, not a project, but a mid-tier guy like Corsa was, unless Humphrey's that guy. Lots of questions. Camp's going to be fascinating at center back. Lastly, brings us to goalkeeper. Martin Paz, obviously, frontline starter, one of the best in the league, tremendous. Antonio Carrera, upside looks great. I think a big reason that they did not pick up Jimmy Mauer's options, they think Antonio's ready. There is a school of thought I've expressed that maybe there's better to challenge Antonio Carrera with some starts at a USL championship or maybe a lower Mexican team or something, somewhere he can get some games. It doesn't have to be the whole season. Maybe like 5 or 10 games to really take him outside his comfort zone. Maybe like a lower level Europe, whatever you can swing that can challenge this young man and progress his game, invest in him, not alone to get rid of him, alone like you did with Jesus Ferreira or Brandon Cervenia or Imoto Amasi, these loans where they're going to play and be challenged. That would be great for him. On the other hand, Drew Keyshawn, one of the best goalkeeper coaches in the league, being here and training with that guy game after game after game and week to week and day to day in training is huge. Don't undersell that. And then that's it. They need a third keeper for sure, period. Need a third keeper. If they miss on Eyestone, maybe it's maybe they call back Jimmy Mauer and bring in a veteran. If they loan out Antonio, then again, maybe they call back Jimmy Mauer. Maybe there's another journeyman out there. Maybe there's another young guy that they can fill in a slot with. You at least already need one third keeper. The guy they've signed for North Texas is 18. There's no way that guy's going to walk in and be ready for the MLS. That's not the point with him. That's a project down there. That's a typical North Texas diamond in the rough. The next name out of the academy, other than Julian Eyestone, which we know they're attempting to sign, but it's not looking good. Then you go down to like a 16, 17-year-old kid. That's not going to work either. So some questions abound here at goalkeeper. Even if you keep Antonio in town, you need a third guy. And I think there's something to be said for challenging him and maybe bringing in somebody else, bringing in Mauer back and then bringing in another guy for a short period of time, or riding Paz and Mauer and with a right of recall career when you need him to, or when you feel like he's accepted that challenge and beaten that challenge that you find for him, that 5, 10, 15 games, bring him back midseason maybe, as the number 2 guy and slide Jimmy down to 3. Still some question marks at goalkeeper there, obviously, clearly. So we went through all that, and you can see that there's still 1 or 2 spots they've got to solve. You need at least 1, probably 2 center backs, 1 starter, 1 mid. You need at least 1 goalkeeper for sure, whether it's a third guy or whether it's a second and Antonio's going to go somewhere for a little bit. You might even need 2 goalkeepers if you find a really great spot for Antonio for a whole year. And all these things we've talked about already are adding up to more than 30 players. So there's something's got to give here in some capacity.
The tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances.
And we haven't even really talked about how the team actually gets better. And that's something we've been harping on for a while now, is if you do all those moves we just talked about, the center backs and then the keeper, your roster will in most ways be done and finished. But is it better? Man, you're counting a whole lot on the draft pick that you just nabbed, Logan Farrington, being good. You're counting a whole lot on Paul Arriola returning to 2022 form instead of 2023. You're counting a whole lot on Sebastian Lletget returning to form. You're counting a whole lot on Alan Velasco coming back early and providing a punch in the playoff chase or into the playoffs over the last month of the season at best. And I don't think there's any way in hell you walk off of the rehab ground onto the training field and make an impact like that. How good will Giovanni Jesus be when he comes back midseason? Can Asir Yarmini be the frontline 6? Do you have enough depth to get through these mid-pack games? Are any of these youngsters, Norris, is he going to make a progression? Is Tariq Scott, the other homegrown who spent a year out with a double knee, is he going to bring something? What about Eugene Ansa? Has he provided anything yet? Is it 6 months in now? Are we going to see a bounce from him? Is Kamungo going to break through 10, 12 goals? Maybe. That's the one that actually has the highest chance, right? I mean, we've seen how goal pure that kid is when he gets in front of net. Maybe he's the 12 to 15 goal guy you're missing. Maybe. Is Jesus going to be here or in national team camps, or is he going to stay healthy this time? There's a whole lot of ifs, man. And maybe this is the way it just has to be in Major League Soccer when you're a team with middle of the league budgets like FC Dallas is. Credit to them for lately being not on the bottom. They've been in the middle. Good on them. They're working on filling in some of these mid to bottom roster, like a Sam Jonka types, which were a phenomenal ad last year. A lot of that stuff helps them grind out a few points here and there and keep them in the playoffs. If all those things hit, will they be back to like third, fourth in the West? Potentially, like they were in 22. I don't know why not. I mean, all that looks good. If it all hits, this team looks pretty good. But if all that hits, and what are the odds that all of it hits, are they going to make headway and climb the standings in the West? If LAFC collapses, maybe, I suppose you could, because they're moving on from a bunch of big names. They're going to kind of reload. But Seattle, same thing. They were already reloading last season and moving on from those big names. Those teams are still good. St. Louis looked pretty good. Have you done anything to make yourself better than those teams? Man, I don't know. Not unless this Logan Farrington kid is real, like 15 to 20 goals real. Not unless Kamungo is blowout 15 goals real. Because I remember that's the number. You got to add 15 goals to get in that conversation. If those two guys, because if Farrington is real as a 9, that'll take away some of the totals from Jesus. So, you'll need those 3 guys to all be banging in goals, really. Or the rebound of Paul Arriola. I'm just not super optimistic. When you have a DP like Alan Velasco out for the chunk of the time, and you have guys getting a little longer in the teeth that you need to come back and look really good. I mean, if you're going through the year with Sebastian Lletget looking like he looked this year, that's a lot of weight on Paxton Pomykal with Velasco out. Paxton's having to carry every game. We know he can't do that. We know he can't play every single game. He needs to play about 2/3 of the games, maybe. Then all of a sudden you're looking at Yaramendi and Paxton both having to play a huge load, with Frazier having to start a lot of games rather than a couple of games. If Lletget crashes out and Velasco's not back, I mean, that's tough. This roster's in a fragile state. Over the next month, it needs some shoring up in a couple of key spots. We got to figure out how they're going to construct this thing, because right now there's a bunch of kids that we know little about. Mulatto, Farrington, Dante Seeley, Tariq and Malik Henry Scott, Nolan Norris, Herbert Endeley, even Antonio Carrera at the MLS level. There's a lot of guys here. Seeking and Sebling has had great moments, but not consistent. Enes Sali, the new kid, Canadian Romanian, what has he done in MLS? Nothing. We have no idea what we're going to get in him. Eugene Ansa, has he proved himself yet? That's a whole bunch of kids and a whole bunch of mid-tier guys that we don't know what we're going to see. We don't know what we're going to get. And I don't want to be too pessimistic. Ali Urza, another homegrown. Thomas Pendeka, another Sonic from North Texas. That's like half the roster is unproven at this level, at this MLS level. They talked about deepening their roster and being able to better survive these tough loads. And we're looking at like half the roster being unproven at the MLS level. Isaiah Parker, unproven at this level. Even Dante Seeley, who played a bunch, is not converting into numbers in order to keep those spots and keep that playing time. I just feel that this roster's in a real fragile spot. I really do. And I think as I went through position by position, you can see that like the first guy we're pretty confident in, and then it falls off to projects and unknowns. And when you're carrying the load of games that these teams do in the league and Leagues Cup and Open Cup, they talked about trying to deepen this thing, and I'm not seeing it right now. It looks real thin and real project-y. Not young, not super young. These guys are all 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. They're not babies. They're not 15-year-old Brian Reynolds kind of homegrowns. But unproven for sure. I mean, only one or two positions have proven MLS-level players in them. Left back, right back, minus an injury. That's about it. I don't think even at wing goes too deep, and 8 doesn't go too deep and proven. Not Velasco out, and not with Siki not quite banging it yet. I just have so many questions. And center back is a mess. But again, the window won't open until mid to late January. Don't expect deals early in January. Expect them more in late January as they try and massage this roster to a better spot. And really, in the end, how is the roster going to be better? How is the team going to be better? That's the big question. All right, I told you guys last week that this would be the airing of grievances. That's the part we just finished. I started the episode saying my gift to you was a holiday special of myself ranting, raving, discussing FC Dallas. And then at the very end, the airing of grievances of, boy, which way is this thing going to go? Because there's lots and lots of questions. The proof will be in the pudding. The proof will be on the field. We'll see it in the spring. We'll see how it looks. We'll see how it comes together as the season starts. Every year you hope for the progression of players. Every year you hope the young guys are going to come through. Obviously, we're still waiting for that, but there doesn't right now appear to be macro level moves to make this team better. Maybe they all happened middle of season last year. Maybe Yara Mindy and Eugene Ansa are the two answers that will make this team actually better. We'll see. Third Degree, the podcast, has been brought to you by Soccer90.com. Soccer90 wants to give listeners of Third Degree an exclusive holiday special. So you can get those last minute gifts, or let's call them after Christmas gifts, things you forgot to get, or get something for yourself. So from when you hear this podcast through the end of the year, through the end of December, all listeners can get 30% off at checkout with code THIRDXMIS. That's 3RDXMIS. At checkout, 30% off. Our gift to you, Soccer90.com. When you use that code, it'll allow 3 to 4 days for processing and then shipping, and some exclusions do apply, but you will get that special bonus, 30% off, Third Degree Xmas. All right. Happy holidays, everybody. Have a happy new year. Peter, Dan, hopefully everything's going great with you guys with your family and work emergencies. Everybody out there, hope you had a great holiday. Hope you have a great new year. We'll be back next week, which will actually start our 6th season of this podcast. That's incredible. And our 27th season of covering this team. Hope you guys like what we do. Hope you guys support us on the Patreon. Take advantage of that 30% off code through the end of the week from Soccer90. That's all we got today. Hopefully you, FC Dallas Curious fan, enjoyed this podcast, and we'll catch you next week on another episode of Third Degree, the podcast. See ya!
Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast. Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast. Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast. Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast.